Welcome to the Future of Payroll and Workforce Management Insights by HR.com, your go-to resource for insights into payroll and workforce management. From navigating compliance and technology trends to exploring the latest in global payroll solutions, we're here to keep you ahead of the curve. Join us as we dive into the forces reshaping payroll and share practical strategies to optimize your workforce management. Let's get started. Well, hello everyone. Welcome to the latest episode of Future of Payroll and Workforce Management, a podcast here at HR.com where I am an executive community leader who does a bunch of things here, but this is not about me today. This is about our guest, who is Rachel Gibbs. She's a pay transparency and equity specialist and founder of Merities Consulting, hailing from across the pond in Europe. Hello, Rachel.
Hi there. Great to meet you, Brent.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and we've had some great conversations in the green room around our topic today, which is going to be about pay equity and transparency and some of the pivots and changes in the world and how we can kind of keep our aspirations and inspirations up amidst everything. But what I like to ask all of my guests at the outset of these episodes is, what galvanizes you? What brought you into the world of work? What gets you up and running every day when it comes to the world of work?
I think for me, it's so I'm from the UK originally. I moved to Switzerland, and changing countries, you realise that your expectations around pay in particular aren't the same necessarily when you move to another country, and I've seen firsthand kind of a different approach, and with that, I've had expectations that have come from my previous background, and then of course being at working comp, you have full transparency, full pay transparency. You can normally see pretty much everyone's, and you begin to ask questions, and you begin to realize that the answers aren't in accordance with your values or expectations, and that's really what's galvanized me into pay transparency. I'm passionate about the topic because I understand how companies can avoid it, what they can do, what the steps are, and I understand the impact when it doesn't go well. And having seen it not necessarily go well, I'm really keen to avoid it, because it is avoidable. It's not a done deal that it'll all be mush or a complete mess. Organizations do need to prepare, but it's not an impossible task.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. What is, so today we're going to talk a little bit about, here in the United States, there's a lot of folks, a lot of teams have worked tirelessly toward creating conditions for pay equity and transparency. And there's been a developing regulatory framework around pay transparency over here in the U.S. that's not necessarily going away. But the pay equity piece of it has sort of shifted a little bit. But a lot of people have put a lot of effort into this, not only sort of transforming their culture, but also their technological ecosystem to help kind of drive this kind of stuff. And there's a lot of stuff going on. So maybe we could start with you. You bring a real interesting perspective to this whole conversation, being in Switzerland now and in the EU, and which has a very different sort of, I would say probably an aggressive regulatory framework around this. What have you learned around pay equity and transparency from being in the environment where you sit now?
I think there are a number of things. The first is that it does need careful preparation, and this is why and you look across the states, some employers are doing it on a US based approach or a state specific approach, depending on very often how concerned their management team are about what the impact will be locally within each state or city or district, and and so that preparation and getting to the right level that works for the organization is really important. And also, when issues arise, dealing with them in a transparent way, which isn't to say that everyone has to know what everybody's earning, but recognizing that sometimes things do go wrong, even with the best preparation, and that they can be overcome with careful conversations and line manager preparation. I think I feel a bit like I'm mentioning preparation, but that really is the key. And whether that's using a technological solution, like you mentioned earlier, training your line managers, and also training employees. This is another key part of it, so that they understand how pay is determined.
It's really interesting to think about how far pay equity and transparency can go. I mean, what are the possibilities from a regulatory standpoint? What can it look like sometimes?
Well, the EU goes way beyond the US. They've effectively taken some of the elements like sharing candidate, um, the pay ranges or starting salary, not asking for salary histories, outlawing uh, non-discussion clauses. Those are very similar to what you have in some states and cities. And then they've gone it, a long way beyond that to look at reporting and employee information. And yeah, it's quite a lot more regulated here, or it will be. It comes in June 26. But effectively what they're doing much more than you're seeing in the States is they're rebalancing the information, that uh, um, information asymmetry which exists between the employer and the employee around pay. So it's not a complete blank page. I was just looking at Buffer, a US-based company, and the CEO's salary is on there for me to look at, as well as everybody else. And you can see what everybody's earning by every location. It won't go to that extent, but there'll be a lot more transparency about how pay is determined and how people are against their peer group, their job level, as it were.
Mm. I think you mentioned something around asymmetry there. I heard that. Can you delve into that a little bit more? Help us, sort of the audience understand what you're talking about?
Yeah, so my experience has always been that pay is determined by benchmarking, what the market is saying. Going forward, particularly in Europe, they will do more internal relativities around pay, and what the academic evidence, Harvard's coming out of Harvard, for instance, and others are finding that more companies will move to the median position because they can see what their competitors are paying. So unless they've got a compelling reason to pay more or less, many will move to that median position. Going back to the pay asymmetry, or the information asymmetry. Um, the I can see in the market what companies are paying for the same position, and I can get an idea of what my job levels are earning, because I will have a right to ask for where I sit in the pay range and where the average male and female earnings are in that range alongside me. And obviously, if I think I've got a lot of experience, skills, uh, relevant factors, I might go back to my organisation and ask them to explain why I'm paid below the average, and then that's where those difficult discussions come in, and which is where the preparation up front helps.
Mm. I have two questions for you. They're kind of unrelated, but I think they both sort of segue from what you just mentioned. So I'm just gonna sort of arbitrarily pick one. So and then move from there. So one question I have is, well, let me set the stage for you. So there's a lot of folks in the HR space, especially here, and on this, I like to say this side of the pond. I've said it several times already in this podcast episode, but in any event, they're very passionate about pay equity and transparency, especially the pay equity piece of it, fair pay. And there's a lot to be discussed around that. Um, what kind of what kind of words of encouragement do you have for folks here that have put a lot of effort into bringing those goals for which they're very passionate about? To sort of see those goals realized at their organizations, maybe sort of a cultural shift when it comes to pay equity and this sort of thing. What kind of words of encouragement do you have for then maybe this could be wrapped in with the other question, I guess, is what does a highly mature organizational approach to pay equity and transparency look like?
I'll do the words of encouragement first. I think it, pay has always been a hygiene factor. You know, most people don't thank you for paying them more, but they complain if you pay them less. Um, and if you can then really get this hygiene factor nailed down, and people are comfortable that they're paid fairly, so they understand why they're paid, what they're paid, and they believe that they're being treated fairly. You have a really strong basis on which to move the organization forward. It doesn't, it gets rid of all the noise and the distrust, because it's, as much as I'm passionate about my work, it's important that I get paid, and it's important that I can pay my bills. And if I can't feel comfortable around that, then kind of it keeps you stuck. So you get rid of all that noise, get rid of the hygiene factor, and the evidence is as well, which most employees won't want to know, but the academic evidence, that it actually slows pay increases, because as an employer, you have more negotiating power, because you're now no longer negotiating on an individual position. You've got everybody in the transparent pay structure, and I don't mean completely pay transparency. I mean knowledge that they're paid fairly, and it actually makes slows up pay increases, because it strengthens the employer's negotiating position. That's not necessarily a good thing for an employee, but overall, people are believe that they're being treated fairly. I have forgotten your second question, Brent. I'm so
Oh,
sorry.
that's fine. That's okay. I packed a lot in there, and actually, so the first, but you know what? Actually, before we get to it, you brought something up around, uh, obviously you like your work a lot, but you need to be paid, and you need to pay other people, right? And that's so important, and it's come up so many times on this podcast. Just this idea that, and out in the wild too, we have this idea. Why are people productive? Why are people engaged at work? What comprises a good employee experience? All these sorts of things. And one thing and I'm certainly not the first person, but one thing that I thought of the other year, the other month, several months ago, or uh, as I've been thinking about payroll and the employee experience over many, many years, it occurred to me, I think that pay really is ground zero for the employee experience, and
Yeah,
and we're not talking about payroll today, but payroll are really the stewards of that pay, right? And so they become very, very important. Um, Very, very few people have the luxury of doing what they love, no matter what, for their work.
yeah.
The vast majority of people go to work to get paid, and they strive to do what they love within the context and frame of getting paid. And so you mentioned this idea of uh, this isn't the word you use, but insecurity around getting paid or what you're paid, right? There's so much wrapped up in that can really cast a pall over the employee experience. And so I think you really struck a nerve there. You really struck upon something that I think is absolutely seminal for this, and that's the idea that the idea around pay fairness, whether the way to the extent that the fairness in pay is perceived versus a reality, that in a way doesn't really matter, because a person really needs to feel like they're being paid fairly, um, for the employee experience, I think, to be positive.
I think you're right, and I love your idea of ground zero, pay being ground zero. And if you can't get above that, then you, I'm not going to say shouldn't, but it's harder for you to expect to motivate people and move them forward without having got that ground zero um, established. It's your foundation, isn't it?
It has to be rock solid and absolutely unassailable and unquestioned, right? As I like to say, nobody wakes up in the morning, and the turns the light on, and then calls the power company, says, "Hey, thanks for getting my electricity right today," right? It's kind of the same thing with payroll, right? But the minute the electricity is out, well, all heck breaks loose. And so it's kind of the same with pay. So the other question that I had, that I think this is actually a great segue now, is actually, what does a highly mature organizational approach to pay equity and transparency look like? What are the components of it? Like, what can kind of describe this? Maybe break it up into, what are its pieces?
Thank you. Yeah, it's a great question. Um, it consists of a number of things. The first is that you have a solid foundation um, across your pay. So you ideally have some form of structure, so a job architecture, job evaluation system that enables you to compare roles, so that when an employee is concerned that they're not being paid fairly next to their perceived peer, you can explain why that isn't a peer, or that person isn't a peer, or it is. So you have those kind of elements in place, and then ideally you would do some form of pay equity analysis. There's a lot of software out there. Obviously, Excel's another route for that, but comparing pay based on adjusted and unadjusted gaps, looking at averages of pay and comparing factors such as skills, experience, tenure, the factors that you as an organization put into determining your pay. So those are kind of the what I like to think of as the back office comp and ben pieces, but the front office is really the comms piece, and that's explaining to line managers to have conversations, explaining to employees how pay is determined, how those factors have gone into to say you're paid this much, and by comparison, I'm paid this much. I may not know what you earn, but understanding what I earn and understanding the relativities that you're ahead of me because of these factors gives me the confidence that it's been considered carefully.
Yeah, that's interesting. You mentioned the software piece of it, and there's software out there to um, help identify and unearth the potential discrepancies in pay that might be perceived as unfair, or that might in fact be um, not make sense, right? And to what extent is sort of the when you look at the HCM technology stack in general, like, to what extent is that uh, a facilitator or hindrance to getting to being a highly mature organization when it comes to pay equity and transparency?
I there are some fabulous solutions out there, and those those tools will really they'll do two things. One is they'll give you the answer, but they'll also give you the confidence to have the conversations to reassure people that you've done the work. Um, as I say, depending on your organization size, you might be confident to do it with Excel. That is possible. But if you're a large organization, I don't know of any who's, 2,000 plus who isn't looking at some form of solution, just because the complexity involved, and also they bring structure to the work you're doing, whereas otherwise it can be an overwhelming hill of challenge to get through.
Yeah, absolutely. It occurred to me that probably an organization that has a progressive approach to its HCM technology stack in general is going to be probably positioned better to avail itself of a pay equity and transparency focused software, because that data is going to be more readily available and more immediate. I think about these sort of um, bad technology software ecosystems where it's just tough to get that information, it's old, especially if you're a large global organization. It's really tough to get that information. Organizational leadership might ask the payroll team for a piece of data that they need right away. They don't realize it takes maybe even 5 days to obtain it, right? And so thinking about these sorts of conundrums and how they can affect this. Yeah, there is that software piece to it. Absolutely. Um, how how does having sort of a mature approach and and the conditions, mature conditions for pay equity, for exercising pay equity and transparency. How do how do those organizations maybe sort of step into their power now, as the sort of uh, the macro conditions or environment for pay equity and transparency change, so that they can keep their organizations looking looking to that north star of achieving this idea of pay equity and being ready for pay transparency when they need to be.
Yeah, it's um it's funny because there's a lot of interest talking about maturity. There's a lot of interest within the very small startups for a differentiated approach, which fits with some of the founders' values. And so they're immature organizations, but they've adopted pay transparency from the get-go. And I can think of a few organizations, actually quite large ones now, who've been successful because they've one of a number of factors, but they've kind of got that bedrock right, and they've got on with other things because they started from a strong position. The maturity part is a challenge because I know from my own experience when you do M&A, you get people come across and they're often on different terms and conditions. Their salaries may be higher, their benefits may be lower, but uh, again, it goes back to this comms piece. You In Europe, it's slightly different, but in the US, you have perhaps more freedom to accept that that group are paid more because they transitioned across. And in Europe, it might be, excuse me, you might look to navigate that over a period of time. But those factors make it so much more complex, unfortunately. And also getting support for line managers to make recruiting decisions as part of the process of maturing through pay transparency. There's a lot to it. It's quite can be quite complex.
Yeah, yeah. It's occurred to me just bouncing off what you said just now that if you have the conditions in place to bring about pay equity and transparency more readily, right? You have the conditions in place so that it's not a real heavy lift to do
Yeah.
it. You've removed a major obstacle to doing it because uh, opposition may, I imagine, a large contingent of the opposition might come in the form of, well, gosh, that's going to be so difficult to just even make happen, right? But if you can show that hey, we have the conditions in place now to do it already, then
Yep.
you're more than halfway there. Then it's just a matter of maybe the argument of, well, should we care about pay equity and transparency if we're here in the United States talking about it from that perspective, and that becomes a more difficult argument to make, really, probably when it's so easy to make sure that it does happen. Um, so that's a thought that I had, sort of based off what you're saying. Um, but one last question for you. Um, what do you think? What do you think the future of How's the future of pay equity and transparency? I don't mean to drop this huge question on you because it's so profound, but what do you see in the future for pay equity and transparency, like worldwide, or is it going to be sort of very different according to which region you're in, or like, directionally, where do you think we're headed, or maybe there's no way to know right now? I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that.
I've given a lot of a lot of thought to this. I mean, it is a regional topic. It is a privileged topic because, I mean, when you look at the pay gap in Afghanistan between men and women, women are having to work twice as long and more to achieve what a man earns in one period, as it were, one time. Um, I, my instinct, and I was having some correspondence with a contact in the US. I think it's actually going to disrupt how we, and this is maybe a European aspect, but I think it's going to disrupt how we approach pay. So, as I said earlier, my career has been built up on benchmarking. I've gone out to the market, I've found out what people are paid. Now, particularly in Europe, we'll see that the internal relativities of pay are going to become much more important, and um, th- there'll be more time spent on employee comms around pay. And I think of my own experience when I've done a pay review, I've worked damn hard. There's absolutely no question about that. I've not gone to employees and explained how the budget was determined, where the pay was allocated, the budget was allocated, how the business achieved the extra funding to achieve the budget. It's just been, pleased to thank you for all your hard work. Your new salary will be X, and thank you. And but that's going to be the nature of it going forward. That greater interaction with the business from HR, from compliment specialists, reward specialists, and also more engagement with employees around pay determinations. It's a big
Yeah,
change.
absolutely. I think you're right. You look at AI and large
Oh,
language models and how they're helping employees understand their pay better, and it's designed for people to be maybe more engaged with their pay. I think there's going to be a real demand, however the regulatory environment, landscape evolves regionally. Um, I think there's going to be a rising sort of just demand from employees because of their as it becomes easier for them to and more straightforward for them to understand their pay and engage with their pay. There's going to be more demand for pay equity and transparency. So yeah, I agree with you, and I think we're going in that direction. Rachel, thank you so much. Thanks so much for being a guest on the episode. I really appreciate it. This is an important topic, and it's so great to get your perspective from where you sit.
thanks, Brent. It's been an absolute pleasure, absolute privilege, and a pleasure. So thank you. Thank you so much. I've enjoyed
Oh,
this.
yes, absolutely. Thank you. Thanks for tuning in to the Future of Workforce Management and Payroll Insights by HR.com. We hope today's episode brought you valuable insights and fresh perspectives on the future of payroll and workforce management. Be sure to check out more episodes and explore resources at HR.com/podcast or wherever you listen to podcasts. Until next time, keep innovating and making a difference in the world of payroll and workforce management.